Hey, good afternoon and welcome. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. I want to say thank you to those that are joining us in person that made the trek. We're getting quite a bit of weather here in the Milton area. So for those members that joined us, thank you. I know it wasn't exactly easy to get here. For those joining us across the country, thank you. I want to say, really do appreciate you joining us today. As you know, we're facing a period of uncertainty with the ongoing trade discussion between the United States and Canada. Today, we want to address that situation regarding the pending tariffs and discuss the pending impacts to our industry and emphasize the importance of unity and support to the landscape horticulture sector here in Canada. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. I'd like to offer some very special thanks. In order to make today happen, both Landscape Ontario teams and teams from the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association collaborated to bring this broadcast to air. So I just want to make a very special thank you to both teams there. And special thanks to the BC Landscape and Nursery Association, Landscape Saskatchewan, Landscape Alberta, the Manitoba Nursery and Landscape Association, Landscape Ontario, Landscape New Brunswick, Landscape PEI, Landscape Nova Scotia, and Landscape Newfoundland and Labrador. We have members represented from all the provincial trade associations across the country joining us today. Here's what we know so far. The U.S. has indicated intentions to impose tariffs on certain Canadian goods. With the announcement from the White House that we're expecting this afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern, Canada has publicly stated that it will implement retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods in response to the U.S. tariffs imposed. There's a list of those pending retaliatory tariffs that the Canadian government has posted for comment. Both Landscape Ontario and the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association have submitted comments on that list as it relates to our sector. Specific details and the full scope of those tariffs are still under negotiation and subject to change. The exact items affected and the timing of implementation remain fluid and will require very close monitoring. It's crucial for everyone to understand that this situation is dynamic and new information is going to emerge really at any time. We're actively monitoring developments and will continue to provide updates as they become available. It truly is an ever-evolving situation. In these uncertain times, it's more important than ever that we stand together, both as a community, within Landscape Ontario and the provincial associations across the country, and together as the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association. We should consider supporting our domestic markets by prioritizing local suppliers and businesses, share information and resources as they become available to all members to help navigate those challenges, advocate for our industry's interests with government officials and trade representatives, and maintain open lines of communication to work collaboratively and find solutions. By working together, we can mitigate as many of the negative impacts as possible and ensure that the continued strength and resilience of our industry remains. Our collective efforts will be key to weathering this storm and emerging stronger on the other side. Today we have Victor Santacruz, the Executive Director of the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association, and Corinne Pohlmann, who's the Executive Vice President of Advocacy for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Both Victor and Corinne will share their perspectives with us. We've asked you for questions in advance when you registered, but if you do have questions, we will be monitoring those quite well, so please put those in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer. We're not going to have all the answers today. and I don't think that anyone's really expecting that. But whatever questions that come up that we don't have the answers to, just know that we will look to get answers for those, and we will post them on our resource hub on the website. In that, I'd like to hand it over to Victor Santacruz for his insights.
Thank you. This will be very short. I don't have many insights, but let's talk a bit about, I guess, overview of the tariffs. So later on today, around 4 p.m., we'll hear what tariffs will be done by the U.S. in addition to the initial ones. But really, for the majority of the ornamental sector, and specifically nursery and landscape, the real concern is our counter tariffs and how it impacts the average business. Now, it's a complicated situation. A lot of our value chain is highly integrated with the U.S., specifically and not limited to plant material, nursery stock, fertilizers, equipment, stone material, aggregates, just about everything you can think of. There's a component that comes to the U.S. or goes to the U.S. from Canada. So first of all, let's talk about primary production. In primary production, our exports are the concern. Now, for our sector, we fortunately, or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, we export about 6% of our total production. So it's not a exorbitant number that we export. And that's nursery. So think of woody ornamentals. When it comes to the other side of ornamental horticulture, which is floriculture, we export over 40%, and that's substantial. So we'll talk really today about nursery and landscape because that's the majority of our members. For the nursery product, the export, I'll repeat, it's not as severe, but it will impact a few members that are very export driven. And it impacts in a couple of ways. Of course, products could be priced. You might have contracts with some of the mass merchants in the US where your pricing has been set and you're contractually bound to continue with that pricing even though you have an increase 25% of tariffs to your product. So that's challenging. Some of that has been mitigated with the lower Canadian dollar, so you're able to keep a higher amount of dollars in your pocket and still try to pay some of this tariff. But it's still a problem. And not only that, some custom houses are requesting for a percentage of your exports for the year ahead of time so they can handle tariffs as you're having product going through the border. This has been reported by members, and it's very concerning, especially at the beginning of the season where you may not have the cash flow or the sales to essentially pay that money ahead of time before yourself are getting paid. But really the issue for us is counter tariffs, and this pretty much impacts everyone in the value chain, from producer to landscape to retail to suppliers, everybody in between. And the estimated amount right now by the government is tariffs on 200 billion products. As Joe mentioned earlier, we did put some requests to eliminate or not include plant materials, fertilizers, and equipment, very specific to our sector, but we're competing with everyone else in the Canadian economy to remove that 200 billion mark to 130 where the government wants it. So there's about $70 billion that are out there for exemptions potentially. So we're hopeful that some of that will be removed, but it is a complicated piece of work that the government will have to do to figure out what's best for the Canadian economy and where there are no alternatives. So in regards to alternatives, the Government of Canada and, of course, the sector is encouraging you to look at other sources of supplies for your value chain. It's easier said than done. You can imagine a landscape company that has, let's say, John Deere equipment or Caterpillar. You have staff that are accustomed to working. They've been trained on this equipment. And you probably have some, let's say, repairs or staff that might help with maintaining this equipment. It might be very hard to switch to Volvo, Kubota, Hyundai, or other suppliers all of a sudden as you need more equipment. So it's a long-term challenge. I do feel that the sector will eventually move away to other suppliers, and this could impact long-term American prosperity of their products. We recently had a board meeting and a leadership summit in North Carolina, and we visited Caterpillar Manufacturing. And the sector's so integrated. You have engines coming from the UK, paint material coming from Mexico, and aluminum coming from Canada. The tariff for the U.S., they'll pay 25% potentially on those inputs, and then will be charged again once it comes in here. It might become cost prohibitive to continue with some of your current value chain. So it really creates a sense of uncertainty in the sector. So that's the, I guess, the state of the union right now. We've asked for a lot of ornamental organizations, Landscape Ontario, other associations. We have asked and written letters to the government to exempt our sector, but really we won't know until a few days what Canada's response will be. But before we have a response, we need to know what the U.S. is going to do, and we won't find that out until later this evening. So with that, I guess I'll stop talking, and I'll see if anyone has any questions, or if we want to dive into anything specific, we could. And I guess I'll pass it back to you, Joe. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Really appreciate that. If we have no questions from online, then I think now's a good time. We'll hand it over to Corinne from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business.
Hello, and thanks for having me. I appreciate having the opportunity to share a little bit of what's going on from the perspective of the CFIB. For those of you that may not know who the CFIB is, it's the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. We represent over 100,000 small and medium-sized businesses right across Canada from every sector of the economy and every region of the country, which does include a lot of nurseries and landscaping types of businesses as well. So I suspect some of you may also be members, and so thank you for that. I'm here to really talk a little bit about what are some of the things you could potentially do to address or deal with this. I think Victor's talked about some really good initiatives that were similar to some of the things that we are also sort of expressing to members as ways to potentially mitigate this. Also, as Victor pointed out, we don't know what's going to happen this evening. Rumors are everything from, it may not be as bad as you think, but even if it's not as bad as we think, it's still going to be worse than it is today. So that's the unfortunate part of what will be coming at us. Lots of rumors. And of course, with President Trump, you just never know what direction it's going to go. If it's a last minute reprieve, if they do it for a day and then change their minds, it really is a roller coaster. And even that, I know, has a huge impact on many of you and how you operate your businesses. Just the uncertainty is very difficult. So we have created on our website as well a very, I think, fairly comprehensive. We're trying to update it as much as we possibly can. It's a webpage called at cfib.ca/tariffs, where we're trying to provide updates on an ongoing basis of what is happening, which tariffs are being impacted and when, and what you could potentially do. We're also trying to answer as many frequently asked questions that we're getting from our members through a variety of different sources. We have a telephone line that we use that gets lots of those questions coming in. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was what are some options for you to also help mitigate these costs? Some of the things we're talking about generally, of course, will depend on whether you're an importer or an exporter. As Victor rightly pointed out, it's really, the exporting side of the equation is going to have a huge hit from the American side, the importing side, obviously, on the Canadian side, and what the countermeasures are. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see. But the way you mitigate may be slightly different. Of course, first and foremost, you might want to review and renegotiate contracts. So if you do already have a contract with a supplier or a customer, is there some way that you can review that with that customer or client and supplier, and determine whether or not you can renegotiate part of that, figure out how potentially you can either share the cost or something along those lines, or mitigate the cost in some forms. Often that might, if you need to change the terms of the contract, you're probably going to have to see a lawyer in order to determine how to do that appropriately, if you're able to do that. That is definitely one area I know a lot of folks are trying to figure out. I also understand for a lot of folks who are exporting to the United States, their customers there are telling them that they want the Canadian company to absorb the cost. These are all things that you're going to have to figure out a way to negotiate, and maybe something that you have to get prepared for. But others, I think, are willing to work if you've been a long-time customer or supplier of yours over the years. Of course, as mentioned already, and as the Canadian government is certainly encouraging, can you pivot to new markets? Can you find out whether there's another company or customer within Canada or within another country? Now, it's important to note that Canada does have 15 free trade agreements with 51 countries around the world. So there are actually many other spots in the world with which you could find a more free and open type of arrangement. Probably the most well-known are things like the European Union. We've had a Canada-European trade agreement for a number of years now, as well, of course, many places in Asia and South America. So there are a number of spots around the world where there may be a potential, depending on what it is you're trying to sell or buy, that could help you. What we have found in our own data is that for those that import products, the ability to pivot and find new customers is more in the 3 to 6 month range, versus if you're an exporter, it seems to take longer because which makes sense, because having to find a new customer for your particular product may take some time and to go through the negotiations, figure out a way to get it shipped, all of those things, and that can take up to 6 months to a year on average. That was sort of what the average was coming from our own membership. If that's helpful, I don't know. If of course you're able to find that, that's of course another big question mark. We have been telling people, though it may be a bit too late right now, to stockpile, order as much as you can in advance. If it's not something that's going to go bad, then that could be another way to sort of at least mitigate the cost for a little while, and maybe things will change in 3 months or whenever it is that you're able to stockpile. However, after today, that may be a bit more challenging should the tariffs that come in be as widespread as everybody is predicting. As I just said, acquiring goods from countries that may not be affected by the tariffs, and having those things then get directly shipped to the United States. So we don't know how broad these tariffs are going to be today. There may be countries still exempt from those tariffs. We don't know, though the threat seems to be pretty global. Again, is there some way or somehow that you could do that is another option. Another one that helps to sort of lower the cost, doesn't get rid of it, but may lower it a little bit, is that you can unbundle some of the reduced landing costs. For example, often you have to pay shipping within as part of the shipping cost as part of the product that you're purchasing. Perhaps there's a way that you can reduce or unbundle the shipping costs because you don't have to pay tariffs on that. You're only paying tariffs on the goods. So if there are any other service costs or any other related costs to that shipment that aren't exactly rightly about that good, those, if they can be unbundled from the total cost, you may not have to pay as much in tariffs as you originally thought, because those don't have to be, tariffs do not have to be applied to those particular costs. So those are definitely some of the things that we have been sort of suggesting to folks as they think about what their opportunities might be. You know, longer term, you may have to start thinking about, and that's sort of more the short term things. Longer term, you may have to start thinking a little bit about, you know, in future contracts, how do I protect myself if this continues to be something? So if you start building new contracts, you know, and identifying opportunities for cost savings. Can you diversify your suppliers so you're not so dependent on, you know, a high tariffed region? Not that you went into it thinking that was the case, but maybe being a bit more risk averse going forward in those areas. Maybe developing broader networks, whether it's within Canada or outside of Canada, to optimize your logistics. Looking at your inventory. Is there any way that you can improve the forecasting and your stock management going forward? So is it, if you've sort of been working on the just-in-time sort of initiative, is there a way that maybe you can adjust that so you don't have to be as reliant on just-in-time? Different things that may help in the longer term. And there's other things. Workflow automation can sometimes help streamline operations. These are all things that I think different businesses are starting to think a little bit more about in terms of encouraging different ways to sort of either mitigate the cost today, or in the longer term, trying to figure out how you can adjust to what could become the new world order, unfortunately, over at least the next 4 years. But what if none of that really is workable, or if you still need some assistance? There are programs and services out there that may be able to help. Just a quick sort of summary of those that kind of exist at the federal level. For example, there's something called the Trade Commissioner Service. This has been around for a long time. It's part of Global Affairs Canada. Their sole purpose is to help exporters find new markets. And they have offices in all of the embassies and consulates around the world. And they are there to sort of help identify potential partners, whether it's customers or suppliers you could potentially sell to. They're more export oriented though than import oriented. So it is more for the exporting side. So if you're looking for customers in other countries, they may be able to help connect you with folks. So they're sometimes worth a call if you're looking to diversify into new markets. There is, as part of this whole process, there is a remission process. So after today, should the Canadian government decide to impose counter tariffs and you are an importer, you may be able to, and you're on that list or the product's on your list, there is a mechanism by which you can go to the federal government and say, I can't be paying tariffs on this particular product that's being imported into Canada because it's the only source that I have of this product, and you can make a case for the government, and they may take it and make some adjustments to it. It's a very difficult process. I'm not going to lie. It's not the simplest thing to go through. But if you have a good, compelling case, they will consider that. In my time doing this job, they always have remission processes when they've implemented tariffs like this. For example, back in 2018 as well. Very few do get that remission, but it's not zero. So they do provide it sometimes. So that's another process if you really get hit hard by whatever the Canadian government decides to implement over the course of the next 48 hours. And that is something that you could potentially use. There is a few other programs that the government has announced, or at least whatever the government is right now. Of course, we're in this bizarre situation that we're in an election mode at the moment. And so we don't have a real government. Well, we do, yes, we don't. And so some of these initiatives are maybe not quite yet up and running. But the government under the new Prime Minister, just before the election was called, did announce that they were going to launch a few things. There's one with Export Development Canada called the Trade Impact Program. They're going to deploy about $5 billion over 2 years to help exporters reach new markets. And so Export Development Canada is another resource besides the Trade Commissioner Service that does help companies deal with exporting and helping them with some of the challenges that come along with that. It could, some of the things they can do to help companies navigate those challenges include, helping deal with losses from non-payments, losses due to currency fluctuations, and that kind of thing. So they are another resource. There is also extra money being provided to BDC, or the Business Development Bank of Canada, specifically to help businesses impacted directly by the tariffs. And those companies that are in their supply chain, so even the downstream clients that may not necessarily do the actual exporting but are part of the process. And they will potentially have some more money. It is a loan, which is, again, a little disappointing because I know the last thing a lot of small businesses of today want to do is add more debt, considering that many are still trying to get rid of the debt from COVID. But at this point, that is what the federal government of Canada is offering. Something similar through Farm Credit Canada for those in the agriculture sector is also being offered. They did announce a deferral of corporate income tax payments and GST, HST remittances from April 2nd to June 30th. So you don't have to file those taxes for the next 3 months. If that helps with your cash flow, you're still going to have to pay it. We just get it delayed until June. And so that is one of the things they have tried in the interim to sort of help on the short term with cash flow. And there's going to be some more money to regional development agencies. So if there is any in your area, this includes, FedDev Ontario. It includes Canada, used to be the Canada West, not the Canada West. I can't remember what it's called now, but they split it into a BC portion and a Prairies portion. And they have in every province one of these development agencies who are also being given more funding to help smaller businesses deal with the impact of the tariffs. Finally, if you do find yourself in a situation where you may actually have to potentially lay people off because you're not able to sell, you're not getting the cash flow, it's having that kind of an impact on you. There have been some flexibilities put in around the EI system. So one, for your employees, it'll be easier for them to access EI, but before that may even have to happen, there is the EI Workshare program, which allows employers to have people work much fewer hours in a week and sort of supplement their income with EI while you still pay them. So you don't lose the employees, but you don't have to pay them for a very slow period of time while you go through this transition to figure out what you're going to do next. So they have made some more flexibilities in those areas. Finally, I want to just talk a little bit about interprovincial trade. So that has gotten a lot of, I would say, a lot of exposure over the last several months, and it's very promising. This is an area we have been, as an organization, identifying interprovincial trade barriers as an issue for over a decade. To see the momentum we're seeing today from a lot of provinces as well as the federal government to try to address those interprovincial trade barriers, I think is really promising. But the words have to become with action. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the interprovincial trade barriers that they do get rid of are done quickly and actually has an impact on businesses, like many of yours have the ability to more quickly move into other provinces and determine whether or not there's a market there for you. Unfortunately, the only province so far that's really made some good momentum on this is Nova Scotia. They've introduced legislation where they promise to mutually recognize the standards and regulations of a business coming from another province as if they were their own. So you don't have to like redo all the paperwork or get new standards certified. You can actually move in there. The catch is that they'll only do it with another province that does the same thing for their province. So no other province so far has actually passed any legislation along these lines. However, both British Columbia and Ontario are looking at doing the same thing within the next 2 or 3 weeks or very shortly. So we're hopeful that we can see some momentum here, and hopefully that can open up some markets for some of you who may be thinking, well, maybe I should try that province rather than going down to the US to see if my products can sell there. So that's hopefully something we can see some movement on in the next little while. The last thing, of course, I'll mention that is the whole Buy Canada initiative. I think that is a very important and a great way for Canadians to really show their support. We've been very active in trying to help our business members and hopefully some of you to be able to illustrate and show that you're a Canadian company and that businesses, individual consumers can come and be confident about your products, and you can do the same potentially with business customers as well. And I think there's some momentum there that could be helpful and hopefully encouraging more and more of us to diversify our trade away from the United States and more into the Canadian market and into other countries around the world. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over back to the floor.
Thanks so much, Corinne. Very, very insightful. We really appreciate your comments and your expertise. I'm sure this has been a busy time for your team at CFIB. Do we have questions that have come up since, Justin?
Okay, so we're going to start with this one from Blake. How exactly do the tariffs work? Are the American tariffs affecting goods that companies in Canada are buying and importing, or is it the other way around?
So the tariffs that the U.S. imposes means that they're imposing it on Canadian companies who are exporting into the United States. So when Trump talks about 25%, that's on goods being exported from Canada into the United States. So it's actually the American companies buying from you that are supposed to pay it. So it's a tax on those companies. Obviously, the counter tariffs, which Canada imposes, is the opposite. So Canada's imposing those tariffs on imports coming into Canada. So that's up to those Canadian companies that are buying those products that the Canadian government has identified will have to pay the extra money to the Canadian government in regards to those products.
Thank you. There was a question from Dave Van Bell as well, or a comment that's pretty hard to ship plants with soil anywhere but the U.S. So that's definitely a challenge or a risk that we have as a sector for our export of primary production plants. We have been able to export technology, genetics, but it's very hard to move plants to other destinations. So that is, of course, a known risk that we have for a sector. It is something that it's very difficult to adapt as far as exporting. There was a question from Penny. I guess someone asked, how will potential tariffs affect relationships and reciprocal agreements? Example, Great Lakes Horticulture Association, APLD.
Yeah, I can talk to that one for sure. So in a little over a month's time, the Nursery Landscape Association Executive Conference. This is staff from the Nursery and Landscape Associations all across North America will be getting together, and the Canadians are hosting. So that'll be hosted in Ottawa, May 5th to 7th. And we've got the highest registration in NLA's history. We have over 80 association staff coming. Between Landscape Ontario and the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association, I think we've got 15 people going from our collective organizations and 80 from across North America. If this doesn't tell me that relations between Canadian associations and our American counterparts isn't high, I don't know what does. This is an opportunity for all association staff across North America to share challenges and solutions and network and create and build and maintain relationships. So I would say relationships are still very good. And then later this year in September, Landscape Ontario will be hosting the Great Lakes Nursery Landscape Association Conference, and that's going to be held in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And there, the executive directors, along with their president and president-elect, will be there. So there's approximately 27 to 30 people that will be attending that particular conference at 2.5 days. So I would say relationships are still very good between Canadian and American associations. We do have a question on the floor.
Thanks a lot for your presentations. My question, it kind of is a follow-up to your comments, Joe, and why we have CFIB here as well. I think this relation between the Canadian business sector and the U.S. business sector has historically been strong and has been certainly growing the last few years. Is this an opportunity? Because I know a lot of other trade sectors in specific sectors have been doing a lot of cross-border lobbying and a really cohesive collective effort to put pressure on U.S. legislative, the U.S. Senate, and lawmakers to really kind of ask the tough questions that I think are long overdue. Is this an opportunity or part of the conference's intention to maybe look at, depending on again what happens today and tomorrow, to kind of formulate a plan or a strategy on how we can work better because this is going to impact both south of the border businesses as much as it's going to affect north of the border. But is there an opportunity at this conference to have those kind of discussions or even leading up to it to have those kind of conversations? I'd love to hear both from the two of you and from CFIB on what their thoughts are or if other discussions are going on that we can learn from before we bring the American contingency here.
Thank you for that. Yeah. The agenda and the content for this conference, if you can imagine, as you can imagine, was put together well in advance of any kind of discussion about potential trade wars. But the discussions will happen for sure. The discussions outside of the conference and the meetings before and after the meetings, I'm sure that's where a lot of these kinds of discussions are going to happen. They're already happening. Our American counterparts and their executive directors reaching out already, and we're having those behind-the-scenes conversations already. So I can say with some certainty for sure we'll have those conversations. I just don't think it's going to be built into the agenda.
And I could just add that it's interesting, I think a lot of business groups, especially larger business groups, are doing that quite effectively. But there is, believe it or not, still some resistance even within the American side. And there are people that support what President Trump is doing, right? So we have to be conscious of that. Just because they may do trade with Canada doesn't necessarily mean that they think this is a bad idea. So I think the best line of offense is to educate, right? And so what we've been doing is providing our members who have obviously do business in the United States with sort of fact sheets. These are the facts. And nothing else that you can do, and maybe I can share this with you if you have customers or suppliers in the United States, is to just talk to them and say, do you know this is the truth? This is what's really happening. This is what the impacts are going to be. This is what it's going to look like. And even the Canadian government has put out some really good fact sheets for businesses to share with their counterparts in the United States. Because Yeah, we can all do this collective lobbying, but it's actually going to be those one-on-one stories. It's that talking to that business across the U.S. border that you may deal with, who then maybe talks to his congressman or her or senator, and that's eventually, hopefully, as time goes on, will have the bigger impact. I mean, a lot of this, I think, is stressful for us in Canada. But I think for a lot of the US, it's only starting to be understood what the implications of this might be. And I think after today, it's only going to grow, especially when things like the auto sector are going to be fully impacted. I think starting today is the auto sector a hit. So it's that collective kind of thing that's going to really make a difference. So that would be my suggestion. I love the fact that you're going to have these sidebar conversations, because that's exactly the same thing as talk to them when they're here, tell them a little bit about, well, this is what the impacts are going to be. And we have nothing against you. It's the policies of your government that are going to have an impact, not just on us, but on you as well. And I think that is one of the more stealth ways of trying to have an impact on a more individual basis. Certainly, we've talked to our counterparts in the United States. They're a bit of a Republican organization, so we have our challenges there, but we are sharing intelligence and doing our best to make sure they understand the implications of what's happening.
Yeah, I would also add that the relationships with our American counterparts are playing dividends now. And if we didn't have these international relationships ahead of time and partnerships, it'd be very difficult to create that influence or that level of trust and have those one-on-one conversations. So American Hort has officially written to the American government to have an exemption on live plants, on sphagnum peat moss, and there's one other product that escapes me right now. Potash, there we go, fertilizer. So there is strong support. Oregon and other state associations have also supported the position of not having tariffs on the sector. So it is working well. I want to address something that was said earlier. I got a text here from a colleague talking about moving products across the border. Make sure you're working with a good and reputable custom broker. They'll be able to really guide you through what is exempt, what does cost money, and what impacts you. Ultimately, you are legally responsible as an exporter or importer for the products that you are sending out or bringing in. So just make sure you're dealing with someone that can help guide you through this process if you're not as familiar with it as possible. Do you want to get to more questions? Sure. All right. You want to go or want me to do it?
So we have another one online. This one is directed to Corinne. Employment insurance work sharing program requires employers to develop and implement a recovery plan aimed at addressing the factors that led to the reduced business activity. Is this requirement being potentially waived?
I believe it is, but as we go through this particular webinar, I am going to check to validate and be sure about it. But I think it is. There's about 5 things that have been loosened or waived completely in this adjustment to the WorkShare program to make it easier to access by businesses affected. But let me validate that as we're on this particular webinar just to make sure I'm right.
Another online question. How will these tariffs trickle down into the design, build, and maintenance sector? This particular person has already lost 2 maintenance clients.
Yeah, I might take a stab at that one, or at least high level anyway. I think what we're expecting initially is people with that that income, that disposable income that they're going to spend on landscape construction projects and money that they'll use to take care of their properties. I think we're going to start to see initial shrinkage of that market initially. As people start to be a little more careful about how they're spending. I mean, we saw that during the pandemic. Initially, people held onto their spending. You couldn't travel, I couldn't do anything, but they were holding on to their money because they just didn't know what was going to happen. And I think that's what we're going to see this time around as well for this tariff situation. But I also think people are going to start to spend their money domestically. We've already started to see it with travel. Travel to the United States is historically low in the last few weeks. And I think we're going to start to see people invest in their homes again. We saw that through the pandemic, and with the Canadian independent garden center market and Canadian nurseries, all promoting Canadian-grown plant material. I think we're going to see an influx in sales in Canadian-grown plants and Canadian-produced materials and stone. I think we'll see a boost to the industry that way. And at the end of the day, with maintenance, the lawns are still going to grow, trees still need to be cared for, properties still need to be maintained. So I think we'll still see strong market there.
Joe, maybe I could add it's Alan White for those that are online. You can't see from the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association and Landscape and Tariff's board of directors. But I think also a piece of good advice as we go into this, because we haven't experienced something like this before. We tend to look at what the market is going to cost us, what our customers are going to do, and how we charge accordingly. But I think also keep your eyes keenly tuned into what the market's doing to your products and your services. Cost to your employees, obviously. It was great that yesterday we felt, at least in Ontario here, the significant carbon tax reduction on fuel. So that was a nice wake up while everybody's stressing to see that go down. But just make sure that your contracts, as you go into the year, that you either insulate or make sure you have the proper verbiage in your contracts, so as prices fluctuate, you don't find yourself in a position of negative. And be a little cautious. Like, I know a lot of people are trying to run out and get those trucks they were trying to do, or the equipment they were trying to do. But again, use a little bit of restraint and balance until we kind of get through this uncertainty right now, to make sure that we're as adaptable as we can be to any market fluctuations, and it doesn't impact your cash flow or your margins that you have typically put into your job. So, and again, increasing the cost of goods going to the consumer when there's uncertainty doesn't usually help the sales proposition. So it's kind of find that balance, but whenever there's something like this, it's obviously participate in these town halls, so you have the opportunity to listen and ask questions of your peers, but at the same time, a balanced approach is sometimes the best advice when we're in a period of stress.
Well said, Alan.
Got a new question online here. Where is the list of Canadian-based or grown plants and materials that we can support, share, and promote?
Is the question relating to what is impacted by the tariffs? There is a list by the Government of Canada, but we can circulate it to all attendees on the list that's in question, that's part of the tariff for imports. For exports, I mean, theoretically, it'd be all plants. There really isn't any carve out. And for imports, there are very specific standard harmonized HS codes that we have, but basically falling under the code of 0603, 0604, and 0605 for live plants. So essentially everything under that category falls, but we can certainly circulate the list that has been provided by the Government of Canada that is being considered for counter tariff. So we can include that. Yes, your list. Leslie's list for anyone at home. While I have the mic, there was a question as well from Landscape Alberta about tariffs and World Trade Organization challenge under CUSMA. Any idea how long this will take? So last time that President Trump put tariffs on things that were part of CUSMA, it took months or longer for it to be addressed. And by then the harm was already done. So I guess we have to be careful that we're not applying, let's say, Canadian logic and law into this. Some of these have been tactics. The U.S. president, I believe, knows full well that they're breaking international agreements and let's say protocol, and are applying things to put pressure, and they have a bigger goal in mind, right? So likely things will be dealt with or hopefully cleared up by the time it actually gets a ruling at the World Trade Organization. So it's a complicated issue. Not sure, Corinne, if you have any addition to that, but that's my take on it.
Agreed. WTO can take years to be resolved. The good example of this is Australia had once challenged Canada for providing preferential treatment to Canadian wines over Australian wines. I think that case took over 7 years, and they eventually won. So Canadian wines are now treated the same way as Australian wines in Canada. So I don't know that a WTO challenge will do much in the short term to deal with this issue. And by the time it would, it could be well gone. I don't think it's a bad idea, though, to do that, because I think it's important for Canada to put a signal out to the world that they are challenging the United States. Part of this is putting up a strong front against the Americans. I don't know that, this is a personal thought, that Donald Trump I think prefers that people are tough as well. I think he's a bit of a bully, and he'll walk over people that aren't that way. So I think in Canada's best interest is to try to use all the legal mechanisms they can to sort of push back, and also to give some legitimacy to those particular types of institutions that are there to help sort of adjudicate these types of disputes around the world. But whether it will actually do anything in the short term to help us through this particularly rough period, I doubt it. He might be out of office by the time it could potentially get to its fruition.
Another question here. How should companies respond if U.S. buyers demand Canadian suppliers lower their prices to offset the tariffs?
It's a very tough one, and that's going to basically require some negotiation. So if you have a contract in place already and it doesn't have some sort of clause in it that allows them to do that, then you could fight them legally. However, a lot of contracts may have clauses that allow for changes in the pricing should there be, an external factor that influences why the pricing changes. So this is where scrutinizing the contract that you may have in place is probably a good idea, and making sure that they have the right to do that if you have a contract. If you don't, then it's a different beast. Then you're just going to have to use the power of persuasion and try to figure out a way. And obviously determine for yourself, is it worth maybe offering to pay for part of it if that particular supplier or customer is important to you. So those become business decisions that you as an individual business sort of have to try and figure out. It's an unfortunate situation. We hear about it often, that a lot of American companies are pushing back to say, well, unless you pay for it, I'm going to go find someone else.
Thank you for that, Corinne. Justin, do we have additional questions?
Yeah, we just got an additional one here. Will Landscape Ontario members be notified when a specific list of sector-specific products, materials, etc., that are affected by the tariffs once it's known?
It's more the retaliatory tariffs that will have specific lists on what's affected. As soon as the announcement is made later this afternoon, you understand that the Canadian government will be reviewing that and then coming up with their own strategy on when the retaliatory tariffs will take place. As soon as we have that list, we will make sure that our entire community is aware of that. One of the things that is happening in the background, all of the provincial associations, including Landscape Ontario, are participating in a task force to deal with tariffs through the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association. We're all closely monitoring the situation as it evolves, and as soon as the definitive information is available, we will be circulating that across the country.
This one's sort of a two-part question here. How might we handle questions from clients about American-sourced plant stock, and how do we document material that is imported and exported from neighboring border farms that is owned by an international Canadian-U.S. company?
I'll start with this one. So under CUSMA, we do have very specific rules on place of origin, and typically if product is brought into the country from Mexico, US, and grown in Canada long enough, in our case nursery, It can take years to get product growing and ready for market. So we might bring plant material, rootstock from states in the Midwest and grow in the prairies, and there's not many options for source material. That would still be considered a product of Canada because the majority of the growing and the value took place in this country. We would have to get back to a more specific legal definition of that. We can maybe make a note of that question, and our staff will get back to the group or the participants with that answer. But that's my take or my understanding of it based on the CUSMA agreement on plants. But I'll see if anybody here online as well is texting me to let me know otherwise. But not sure, Corinne, if you have additional details on that.
No, only that we'll find out tonight if CUSMA even still applies, right? So that's the only other caveat to this. Like up until today, if it's already seen as CUSMA compliant, you don't pay any tariffs on it. But if it isn't, then you already do. But tonight that could change. We'll see if they now are going to impose it on everything, even those that are CUSMA compliant. So unfortunately, that is a question mark. If I may, Martine had a question about, is there a Canadian equivalent to the American Consumer Confidence Index? I know it's a little off topic, but which has decreased steadily over the past few years, so what is currently showing for Canada. I could share that CFIB, we do actually have a business confidence index or small business confidence index that we've been producing monthly for probably over, trying to think back, 15, 18 years. And we have seen a dramatic dip just in the last month. So up until about February, it was slowly declining. And then in March, it took a dramatic drop. And so the confidence, at least in the small business community, is dropping. And part of the reason, one of the biggest reasons why it's dropping so dramatically is because consumer demand is falling as well. And that is the number one sort of barrier right now for a lot of businesses. So I would equate that in Canada, both of those measures are also dropping, not just gradually, probably a lot more quickly than in the United States, given I think it's a much bigger part of our economy, one, and two, it's also a much bigger part of our daily sort of news cycle than it might be in the United States at the moment. So I do think it's going to happen also in the United States. I think that their numbers are falling too, and I think it's only going to get worse before anything gets better for them.
One of the things that I've heard quite often over the last few weeks is specific to landscape construction. With the introduction of tariffs and retaliatory tariffs, given that price increases will happen on materials and likely overhead, how does that apply to clients with contracts already in place or quotes that you're about to provide, especially given the timing of the season? And so we've reached out to our construction lawyer, and we're going to be working on a webinar to be able to answer specific questions to that. They have offered that. And there'll also be an article that we'll share that will help with some guidance around that. I understand that we've posted that article to the Landscape Ontario website already, and we'll share that with the CNLA task force as well, so that can be shared across the country. But we're going to try and provide as much guidance on that as well through a construction lawyer.
An additional question that just popped up. What can we do to prepare our staff for the potential disruption?
I'm not sure we're going to see an immediate halt on work. Much like what we saw with pandemic, it was an instant stop work, can't leave your house. We're not going to see that this time around. I mean, the Earth is going to continue to rotate. The sun is going to continue to come up and go down. It's just going to be more challenging. We're going to start to, we understand that it's challenging enough to run a business in landscape horticulture as it is in Canada. This adds another layer to that. but I don't think we're going to instantly see work stopping. So, yeah. Great. If any other questions do come up, please put those in the chat, and feel free to reach out to any one of the provincial landscape trades associations or the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association. All of them will come back into the CNLA Tariff Task Force. We'll all do our best to provide answers to those questions, and we'll be able to post those on respective association websites. Do continue to check out the CNLA website, Landscape Ontario, and the other associations for continued updates. As the situation evolves, we will be posting updates to that website, and when we have anything meaningful to report, we will send that out by way of email and our social media accounts. So stay tuned. We'll know much more in about an hour. On that note, I'd like to thank Victor and Corinne for joining us today. Really appreciate your expertise and your valuable insights. And to the staff teams of CNLA, the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association, and Landscape Ontario for collaborating and bringing this event to members across the country. Thank you very much. Your efforts are well received, and I think that our session has gone quite well. So thank you. I appreciate everyone coming this afternoon. Please stay tuned for the situation as it continues to evolve, and hopefully we'll be able to have some good things to report later. Thank you.